Welcome to Indy Game Reviews. I'm your host, Jittery Jackanate. Our goal is to give you a brief rundown of an independent game while avoiding spoilers. I'll talk about what I like, what I don't like, and then I'll give it a score from 1 to 10. Tunic is a game released in 2022. It was developed by Isometric Corp Games and published by Finji. It is a fantasy adventure game that is played from an isometric point of view. The game plays very similar to The Legend of Zelda for NES and top-down games similar in that nature. The game doesn't really tell you exactly what it is you're supposed to do. It's up to you, the player, to explore the world and figure out where to go, fight enemies, and figure out what happened to the world. If you have played the original Legend of Zelda, you will feel right at home with the gameplay and exploration. I was able to play this title thanks to my subscription to Game Pass. Normally this game would cost you around $29.99. Let's talk about what I liked about the game. The art style. Sound design and overall aesthetic feels very charming and unique. The lighting and color in this game are beautiful, and the isometric camera perspective really allows the game to play with its camera angles for some amazing shots. This game feels like a cinematic masterpiece. I would not be shocked if a lot of this game's design came from the point of making the player feel like they are in a vast open world, and you can feel that as you travel and the camera pans around or has tight shots of a corridor or wide open shots atop some ancient structure. The further I got into the game, the more rewarding it started to feel to play. The early game is a lot more difficult as you run around and explore, especially the sections at the start where you aren't without your primary gear, the sword and shield. But after you start to get other items you might find in similar adventures such as a lantern or a bow and arrow, the game felt very rewarding to play as you've started to figure things out for yourself. It's always very satisfying to go back and fight enemies that you struggled with, and you can see your sense of progression. Speaking of figuring things out for yourself, the game doesn't really tell you what to do or where to go. You yourself are trying to figure all of this out on your own. You need to get exploring and look for paths and secrets to help aid you on your quest and progress. I find this very rewarding to go through the story because you might come out of a cave and then you realize where you are in the overworld. The sense of exploration is super rewarding because every corner might have a secret. I will, however, say that this can get overwhelming. I didn't use this feature until the very end of my experience, but there is a no-fail setting and a no stamina restriction, which allows you to never die or run out of stamina. It wasn't until I got to the final fight where I decided to use these features to my advantage, but now it's time to get into what I don't like about the game. While I don't mind the game allowing us to explore, I can't pretend that it isn't difficult to do that at the start. You can very easily get lost, and this game is not going to help you. While it's fun to explore and see things for yourself, it would be nice if you knew where to go or how to get to areas. I myself had a ton of issues finding the sword at the beginning of the game and ended up having to consult a guide. I left it open throughout my playthrough, but I would only consult it if I got truly stuck. This happened quite a bit, and that is because of the plot. You have no idea what's going on or why, and normally, for me, that's fine. But this game is vague in a fun way and cryptic at its worst. The developers have made this unique language that we, the player, are not meant to know how to decipher, but I found myself having to take external notes to know what items do or areas I've been to. For example, I had no idea what the wells were meant to be used for until about 5 or 6 hours into my 14-hour playthrough. What are they there for? What am I supposed to do with them? And this ended up happening with items that I would collect or areas that I explore. Am I supposed to be here yet? I don't really know, because the game is using a language that we don't understand. And I think because of the game's length, it made it more difficult for me to figure out where I was or what I had done, because it was easy to forget what I did or didn't know. I think a way to counteract this would have been if I used items enough times, or if I found more pages of the manual, our player character would become more fluent in the language of the game. Or if I found all the pages to the manual, maybe it would translate the language for us, because there are some signs in the game where it tells me, this is the forest, this is where you need to go. But then other times, I have no idea what a sign says. I feel like it was kind of having its cake and eating it too, in that sense, and I think a really fun reward for the game itself, in addition to collecting all the pages, apart from what you do get. I think it would have been fun if the more pages you got, the more words in the language you understood. I would have really liked if, for example, I could find out what the word "the" looked like in the language, and then if I open up the manual, that word would be replaced in English. I think that would be really cool. That would be my way of rewarding the progression for finding more collectibles, or if I use an item enough times, it will say, "This is a sword." I know it's a sword, but it's different with your consumable items or your other external weapons, like, say, a bomb. There's multiple versions of bombs. I don't know what all of them do. It's trial and error, and resources are very limited in this game. So I think it would be fair to expect something like that from the game. The combat. At first, like I said in the section of the game that I like, the sense of progression is great. However, the start of the game is not. I found myself struggling in my first 4 to 5 hours of my playthrough of this game. It wasn't until I figured out how to use magical items that I felt a real sense of change to my overall progress, and that was really far into the game. I didn't realize I even had an item that I could use because it said it was a magical item. I had screenshots and gameplay of a blue meter next to your health and stamina, but I didn't have that yet, so I figured I couldn't use the item. I thought that I needed to get some sort of magic meter. I randomly just decided to try the item, and then it worked. I just had magic, and the game doesn't really explain that to you. This is where I feel like deciphering the text could benefit the player. I would find items and not know what they did. The enemies themselves could also be incredibly difficult, and some of them felt like the hitboxes were either off for me, or their method of attack would either penetrate my shield even though I would be blocking. This feels like Legend of Zelda meets Dark Souls, and while some people enjoy really difficult games, I found myself at times getting frustrated. I never caved and lowered the difficulty until the final fight, but there were several times where I considered it because there are sections of the game where it really spikes in difficulty. The boss fights sometimes weren't even the harder parts of the game. There were some that were difficult, but then there would just be individual sections like trying to cross a bridge where there are turrets that are shooting at you, or trying to cross a section where there's a larger enemy blocking a narrow pathway. And those were the more frustrating moments because I would try using an item and then I would die and I would not have that item anymore. And good luck getting more dynamite or decoy items. There's all sorts of items and they're very difficult to find, and if you waste one, it feels like a huge blow to you as the player. Another thing that makes it difficult is you can't actually pause in the middle of the fights to manage your inventory. Some players might like this for the sense of realism. After all, it's not like if you're in a real fight, you can just pause and take out a bow and arrow instead of a sword. But this is a video game. If I pause Legend of Zelda, I can swap my items. And I think that makes this a lot harder to do, especially if you need to swap, say, your sword for a potion or your sword for a bomb. I feel like the shield has its own designated button for parrying, and the sword should have its own designated button for attacking. If we had a system for that, this item system wouldn't be nearly as egregious, but the idea that I can only have 3 items equipped and one of them is almost always going to be my sword makes it incredibly difficult for you, the player, to actually make good decisions in the middle of a fight. I might want a ranged weapon and a bomb, or I might want the sword and only that item. And that could get very difficult, especially in high tense situations where if I run out of a item that I can no longer use, then I have to find a way to pause or find a safe area. And you could get easily one shot in that time. Let's talk about the pros of Tunic. The art style and music are amazing. It's nice to explore and feel rewarded the more that you play. If the game gets too difficult for you, you can always lower the difficulty and just enjoy it for what it is. The cons. The game is difficult at the start and is keen on making you figure things out on your own. This can get very frustrating for new players. The language system is a neat idea, but the game itself makes it easy to get lost and overwhelmed. I highly recommend using a guide. A bigger world map that would have been easier to understand would have helped a lot in terms of making sure that the player doesn't get lost. Also, item selection being a proper pause screen would benefit greatly in the combat sections that are already difficult. I don't want to sound like I'm harping on this game too much. I did genuinely enjoy it. The highs are incredible, and even with my issues with the game, it didn't stop me from wanting to play it more. I just feel it's important to let you all know that this is not an easy game in the slightest. You will die a lot at the start, in the mid-game, and especially at the end. You will find yourself getting lost. You won't know what you're supposed to do with an item or why you're even at the location you're at. Find all the pages if you can for your instruction manual. Take your time. Don't let the game overwhelm you and you'll have a great time. I recommend having a magic item, your sword, and a type of bomb equipped at all times. If you can keep to that, you won't have any major issues around the time you get your first 2 or 3 magical items that you find. I want to refrain from any spoilers for the plot because there is a story here, and it is actually very well done, but if I tell you anything, it could ruin your experience. Get out there and play the game. It is a fun time if you love that sense of adventure and satisfaction of seeing yourself get stronger over the course of a difficult game. But if you're not into incredibly difficult games, there is an easier mode, and I highly recommend doing that rather than just saying, I'm done with this game. My score for this game is going to be a bit different overall. I would say overall it is a 7 out of 10, but I'm going to rank it based on 2 things: enjoyability and difficulty. I would give this a 10 out of 10 for its enjoyability, for its exploration and puzzles, along with its art style and sense of progression. But I also think I have to be fair about my own experience with its difficulty, which I would give it a 4 out of 10 for. The game is difficult. It's easy to get lost, and that makes it hard to recommend without a guide. And without lowering the difficulty, it can get frustrating. If you find yourself struggling with the game, please don't be stubborn like I was. Just lower the difficulty and enjoy the game for its exploration and its puzzles. There is nothing to be ashamed of if you have to do that. For the record, I finally caved and lowered the difficulty for the final fight, and I still struggled with it. And then after a few more attempts, we decided let's just turn on no fail mode so we can say we've beaten the game and we got to see the ending. Its difficulty certainly increased the length of the game for me. This took me roughly 14 hours to beat. The VODs for that will be available in the description of this video. Now that I've cleared the first 2 games on my list, I get to show you the backlog I'll be referring to of games that might be coming up. The list is here and all the stuff I'm planning to do a video on. But the catch is that this isn't the numerical order for the games that I'm going to be playing. Pick a number between 1 and 13. Okay, minimum 1, max 13. Alright, and now let's hit generate. It's 4. Okay, so whatever 4 was is what we're going to play next. 4 is Frog Detective. Well, okay. So even I don't know what the next game is. If you have any suggestions for games, let me know. I will at the very least look at them, and I have plenty to add to this list. Once a game has been beaten, I'll mark it off. Our next review will be of Frog Detective.